He should have been in prison. That is not an opinion. That is not speculation. That is a documented, written, legally binding agreement that a judge looked at, considered, and chose to ignore. Weeks before Carlie Brucia disappeared, Joseph Smith was found unconscious in a parking lot with a bag of cocaine sitting right next to him. He was on probation. The terms of that probation were explicit. That violation was supposed to send him back to a prison cell for 5 years. 5 years. The paperwork existed. The agreement existed. The consequence was already written down and signed. Instead, a judge declined to act. The court reclassified the violation, gave it a new name, attached no prison time to it, and released Joseph Smith back into Sarasota, Florida. 11 days later, an 11-year-old girl named Carlie Brucia left her friend's house to walk less than a mile home. She never arrived, and the man who took her should have been behind a locked door when she took that walk. That is what this story is really about. Not just a crime that was preventable, a crime that the system was handed every opportunity to stop and chose, through negligence or indifference or both, not to. Carlie Brucia was 11 years old, and she deserved better than every single adult who failed her. This is her story. This video covers the abduction, sexual assault, and murder of a child. Some details are disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching this from, and what time it is over there right now as you are watching. I read every single one. Before this case becomes a case, you need to know who Carlie Brucia actually was. Not the girl in the footage. Not the name on the court documents. The real kid. Because everything that follows only hits the way it should if you understand exactly who was in that frame. Carlie Jane Brucia was born on the 16th of March, 1992, on Long Island, New York. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Her parents, Joe and Susan, divorced before she could walk. Her mother Susan relocated to Sarasota, Florida, to be near family, and that is where Carlie grew up. A modest house on McIntosh Road. Her mom. Her stepfather Stephen. Her younger half-brother Leaf. But she never lost her connection to Long Island. Every summer, every Christmas, she flew back up to stay with her father, her grandparents, her aunts. Her father Joe later talked about those visits at trial. Amusement parks. Shoe shopping. The kind of ordinary moments a kid holds onto forever. Christmas was her absolute favorite. Her family up north loved spoiling her. The gift opening was the highlight of every gathering, every single year. Back in Sarasota, life was full. She was in 6th grade at McIntosh Middle School. She sang in the chorus. She loved roller skating. She was genuinely, deeply obsessed with Jennifer Lopez and had decided somewhere along the way that she was going to be a pop star herself one day. She would sing off-key on purpose sometimes, just to make her mother laugh. She had a cat named Charlie. She loved them all. Her music taste was peak early 2000s. J-Lo, Nelly, 50 Cent. Her teacher, Susan Van Olsten, called her an excellent student. One time, Carlie organized her entire class to sign a goodbye card for a student who was leaving. She just did that on her own. Nobody asked her. Nobody prompted her. Because that is the kind of kid she was. Her school principal called her a shining light. And here is the thing about that kind of description. It usually gets deployed after someone dies, because people feel like they have to say something kind. But every single person who knew Carlie said the same thing independently, unprompted, across years. She was warm in a way that was not performed. She greeted her friends with hugs. She respected her teachers. She had this quality about her that just made the people in her orbit feel better for being there. Her mother Susan put it simply at trial. She said, and I want you to really sit with this. I lost the love of my life. I cry for her at all hours of the day. I cry for her at night. I am broken. I will never heal. Carlie had a whole life ahead of her. A younger brother she adored. A father who flew to Florida the second she went missing. A classroom full of friends who would walk into school on a Monday morning and find her seat empty and understand, in the way that children sometimes understand things before adults will say them out loud, that something had gone very, very wrong. She was a regular kid living a regular life. And on the evening of the 1st of February, 2004, she left her friend's house to walk less than a mile home. She never made it. It is Super Bowl Sunday. Across America, nearly 90 million people are parked in front of their televisions. New England Patriots versus Carolina Panthers. Nachos, team jerseys, the whole ritual. The streets of Sarasota are quiet in that particular way they get when an entire country is watching the same thing at the same time. Most of the neighborhood is indoors. Nobody is really going anywhere. Carlie had spent the previous night at a friend's house on Bee Ridge and Leilani Boulevard. A completely normal Saturday sleepover. By early Sunday evening, she was ready to head home, and catch the game with her family. The walk was less than a mile, a route she had taken before. 15, maybe 20 minutes on foot. Around 6 in the evening, her friend's mother Connie did exactly the right thing. She called Susan right after Carlie walked out the door, just to confirm everything was okay. Susan said no. She was not comfortable with Carlie walking alone along Bee Ridge Road that time of evening. She asked her husband Stephen to get in the car and go pick her up. Stephen drove the route immediately. Bee Ridge Road. The exact path she would have taken. On the phone with Susan the whole time. No Carlie. He turned around. Drove it a second time. Still nothing. No pink backpack. No red t-shirt. Just empty sidewalks and porch lights going on in the early dark. Stephen would later tell investigators he had missed her by just a couple of minutes at the most. Susan knew immediately. She told People magazine later, "In my heart, in my mind, I knew." She and Stephen drove together that second time with the windows down, calling Carlie's name out into the evening. They stopped to check a wooded area near the route. And that is when they noticed something that felt off. A red tow truck moving slowly, circling the area. It showed up again later that same night, parked outside Connie's house. Both Susan and Stephen noticed it both times. Something about it settled uneasily and stayed with them. At 7:30 in the evening, barely 90 minutes after Carlie had last been seen, Susan picked up the phone. 911. What is the location of the emergency? My daughter is missing. Has she been missing before? No. She had a fight with her girlfriend, and she decided to walk home, and we have been driving around for about an hour and a half. Now it is 9:30, half an hour to walk. She is gone. We cannot find her anywhere. I have called all her friends. How old is she? 11. And when was the last time she was seen? It was at 6. Around 6. What is her name, ma'am? Carlie. Carlie. She is just a sweet little girl. Her voice on that tape is something else. It is not composure. It is a mother barely keeping herself together, fighting through every single word just to get them out in the right order. Police arrived quickly. They knocked on doors, spoke with friends, drove the surrounding streets. They searched until 3 in the morning. Nothing. 12 hours since anyone had laid eyes on her. The next morning, a Monday, Carlie's classmates walked into McIntosh Middle School and sat down at their desks. Her seat was empty. That is when it started to settle over people like a weight. Her teachers, her friends, anyone who knew her. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a kid who had fallen asleep at a neighbor's house. Something was very wrong, and everyone who loved her already knew it before anyone would say it out loud. Investigators brought in tracking dogs. They used one of Carlie's pillowcases to give the dogs her scent. A bloodhound named Ruby picked up the trail almost immediately and moved west along Bee Ridge Road, nose down, steady, tracking precisely the path Carlie would have walked home. And then Ruby led officers around the back of a business on Bee Ridge Road, Evie's car wash, and stopped. The scent ended right there. Just gone. As if she had been lifted clean off the ground. The car wash was closed on Sundays, but it had several motion-activated surveillance cameras positioned around the property. The owner, Mike Evanoff, pulled the tapes and checked them. What he found on the back camera stopped him where he stood. He brought in the officers. They hit play on footage timestamped 6:20 in the evening of February 1st. And the room went completely still. A girl in a red t-shirt and blue jeans, pink backpack over one shoulder, walks into frame. Carlie. Within seconds, a man appears. Dark hair. A mechanic's uniform. A name badge on the chest, too blurry to make out. He steps directly into her path, says something to her, and then he reaches out, takes her by the arm, and leads her away out of frame. That is it. 19 seconds. The footage was released almost immediately and spread in a way that, in 2004, people had not quite encountered before. Every major television network picked it up and played it on continuous loop. It moved across the internet from inbox to inbox, message board to message board, in the days before social media existed to accelerate that kind of sharing. People who had just been watching the Super Bowl, still wearing their team jerseys, stopped and watched 19 seconds of grainy footage from a car wash parking lot in Florida over and over again, unable to look away. The whole country had just watched Carlie Brucia being taken, and somewhere out there, the man who had taken her was watching the same broadcast on the same screens. The tip lines erupted. Over 800 calls in the first 2 days. Everyone who had seen the footage on every channel or forwarded it in an email had a name, a theory, a face they thought they recognized. Police worked through the calls with urgency. Carlie's stepfather Stephen was examined first. Standard procedure in any missing child case. His phone records cleared him completely and immediately. He had been on the line with Susan the entire time he was out searching. There was no gap, no window, no question. Then came Ron Choquette, The man who owned the red tow truck that had caught Susan and Stephen's attention the night Carlie disappeared. He was Connie's boyfriend. He had been at the house during the sleepover. His truck had been spotted near the car wash. Investigators brought him in for questioning. Coworkers confirmed he had been at work during the abduction. Time cards supported it. He was cleared. Officers went back to the footage. And that is when they found something they had initially missed entirely. 3 minutes before Carlie walked into frame, a pale yellow 1992 Buick Century station wagon had pulled into that car wash lot, circled slowly, pulled back out onto Bee Ridge Road, then slowed to nearly a complete stop alongside the car wash exterior and turned back in. 3 minutes later, Carlie appeared on camera. 3 minutes after that, she was gone. That is not someone looking for a parking space. That is not a coincidence. That is someone who spotted something from the road and repositioned to intercept it. Now investigators had a face and a vehicle. And as the calls continued pouring in, a growing number of them were landing independently on the same name. Joseph Peter Smith, 37 years old, originally from Brooklyn, New York, an unemployed auto mechanic renting a room from a couple named Jeffrey and Naomi Pincus in Sarasota after being evicted from the home he had shared with his wife and their 3 young daughters. His criminal record in Florida went back to 1993. At least 13 arrests. Heroin possession, cocaine possession, prescription drug fraud. He had served time, been released, and been arrested again 8 days after walking out. At some point in the late 1990s, he had been charged with kidnapping and false imprisonment after a 20-year-old woman named Terry Stinson testified that he had grabbed her on the street, knocked her to the ground, and threatened her with a knife. She had escaped by flagging down a passing car. Smith had run and hidden. A police dog eventually located him. Despite Terry Stinson's detailed and credible testimony, a jury acquitted Joseph Smith after he told them he had grabbed her because he thought she was about to jump into traffic. She said otherwise. The jury believed him. He walked. And now here is the part one need you to stay with. Because this is the part that explains everything. At the moment Carlie Brucia was taken, Joseph Smith was on probation. And just weeks before the abduction, he had been found unconscious in a parking lot with a bag of cocaine. The terms of his probation could not have been clearer. That violation was supposed to return him to prison for 5 years. Not a possibility. Not a recommendation. A written, documented, legally binding commitment. A judge declined to act. The court reclassified the violation, called it something with a different name, and attached no prison time to it whatsoever. A paper consequence. Nothing more. Carlie's father Joe Brucia would later state it plainly, without performance, without theatrics, just a man who had done the math. He violated. He was passed out with a bag of cocaine in a parking lot. Instead of giving him the consequence they promised, they gave him drug offender probation, which is just semantics. And that is why my daughter is not here today. The call that cracked the investigation open came on the morning of the 3rd of February, 2 days after the abduction. A school teacher named Lynn Dines was getting ready for work when the car wash footage aired on her morning news. She stopped where she stood. She woke up her husband Ed. Ed Dines had worked alongside Joseph Smith at a repair shop. He watched the footage carefully. At trial, he described exactly what happened in his mind the moment he saw it. I worked with him at the shop, so I knew what he looked like. The sneakers, the back of his head, the way his hair was cut, the way that he walked, his gait, was just like Joe walking through the shop. He has got a different type of walk to him. And then when I watched him reach for the girl, the way he reached, I have seen him pick up tools like that. I knew it was him. They called it in immediately. And they were not alone. Multiple callers across multiple days had now independently converged on the same name without any contact with each other. Detective Toby Davis drove to Smith's address. Officers knocked. No answer. A neighbor confirmed someone was home. Eventually Smith came to the door, claiming he had not heard them because he had been asleep. When investigators asked where he had been on Super Bowl Sunday, he said he had been home the entire evening and that people could confirm it. Then they showed him the still image pulled from the car wash footage. He looked at it. He took a beat. That looks like me. But it is not me. He cooperated with a search of his room and his vehicle. In the room, they found mechanics' uniforms, multiple sets, each with a name badge attached to the chest. In the car, drug paraphernalia and syringes. Smith was arrested on the spot for the outstanding probation violation. And almost immediately, the case appeared to fall apart. His landlady Naomi Pincus told investigators that Joseph had been home that entire evening. A witnessed alibi. With Smith in custody on the drug charge, but Naomi's account placing him elsewhere during the abduction, the case against him for Carlie's disappearance had no ground to stand on. Then the following day, her husband Jeffrey Pincus walked into the police station on his own. Jeff told investigators his wife had the times completely wrong. He sat down and explained what had actually happened that Sunday evening. Smith had woken him and asked to borrow his car, saying he would be back in 15 minutes. Jeff agreed. When Jeff got up again at 6:30 that evening, the car was gone. At 7:30 the following morning, Smith returned. He just looked like he had a good night's sleep. Or he was real happy. He just looked like he had a wonderful night. The way he acted, what I know, it was just very strange. Smith's alibi was gone. He was read his Miranda rights. He asked for a lawyer, and the interview ended. Investigators were now working against time in two directions at once. Smith was in a cell on the probation charge, but they needed direct physical evidence connecting him to Carlie. And somewhere in that footage was a name badge on a uniform chest that nobody could read clearly enough to confirm in court. So they called NASA, not a figure of speech, the actual National Aeronautics and Space Administration, whose researchers applied advanced image stabilization and forensic processing technology to the car wash recording. The enhancement work took days. Every frame examined. Every pixel pushed as far as the technology would allow. When the results came back, the name on the badge became legible for the first time since the footage was discovered. It read Joe. While that work was underway, Joseph Smith's brother John walked into the police station. John and Joseph were not close. Their relationship had always been strained. But John had watched the footage on the news and recognized his brother the moment it played. Not just by his face, by the way he moved through the frame. Joseph had undergone back surgery at some point, and the procedure had permanently altered his gait in a specific and recognizable way. His own brother's girlfriend had made the same identification the moment she watched the clip. That walk was unmistakable to anyone who had spent real time around Joseph Smith. John told investigators what he had witnessed with his own eyes. On the night of the abduction, around 11 in the evening, Joseph had appeared at John's front door. He appeared to be under the influence of something. He was in his usual mechanic's uniform, but his regular sneakers were gone. Instead, he had on a brand new pair of boots that John had never seen on him before. He did not say much. He looked at his brother and asked, "Do you want to talk about something?" John said no. He shut the door. The following morning, Joseph arrived at his workplace and behaved in a way that stuck with the people around him for days. He washed his hands over and over again, compulsively and repeatedly, even when they were visibly clean. He told his employer he might need to leave the state on short notice. Urgently. At any time. After John gave all of this to the FBI, he added something that stopped everyone in that room. He told the agents directly, if his brother did this, he will never admit it. You will not get a confession out of him. Stop waiting for one. Build the physical case. Because Joseph would take it to his grave. Investigators heard him. But they also arranged a private jail meeting between Joseph, John, and their mother, with Joseph's own attorney giving approval for the arrangement. About 90 minutes later, John emerged and told officers that his brother had come close, genuinely close, but had not said anything definitive enough to act on. Nothing usable. Officers took him at his word and let him leave. No surveillance was placed on John Smith afterward. That was a critical mistake. Because that same evening, John picked up the phone and called the FBI. He believed his line was being monitored. It was not. And the moment he said, "I am guessing you already heard. What do I do now?" Every agent on the other end of that call went completely still. They had no idea what he was talking about. 3 agents were in their cars within minutes, driving directly to John's house. Inside that jail room, Joseph had looked at his brother and said, "I am sorry I did this to you." Their mother had left the room in tears. The brothers held each other. And then Joseph kept talking. He said he had taken what he believed was cocaine earlier that day. Said everything that came after was a blur. John said he seemed unable to say the actual words, to state directly that Carlie was dead. Something in him could not form them. So John said them for him. "Okay, Joe. She is dead. Fine. Where is she? We have to find her. Where is she?" Joseph gave him a location. A field behind the Central Church of Christ on Proctor Road. Officers moved at 10:15 that night. John directed 2 FBI agents and a Sarasota County detective to the church. Carlie had been missing for 4 days. The air was dark and the field behind the church sat in thick Florida brush, heavy and close, and completely quiet. Just before 1 in the morning, 2.8 miles from the car wash where she had been taken, they found her. Carlie Brucia was lying on her back in the underbrush. She was unclothed below the waist. A single sock remained on her right foot. A deep ligature mark encircled her neck. She had been dragged to that spot through the brush. Out of respect for her family, and to prevent aerial photography before her body could be recovered with dignity, the White House granted a special no-fly zone over the area that night. Sheriff Bill Balkwell drove to Susan's house himself. He knocked on the door. He told her what they had found. Susan screamed. He killed my daughter. He murdered my daughter. He murdered my baby. The next morning, Sheriff Balkwell stood before cameras. His voice broke as he spoke. The body of a beautiful 11-year-old girl, Carlie Brucia, has been found. Joseph Smith is under arrest for the abduction and murder of Carlie. Now here is the detail about John Smith that made investigators' jaws drop when it came out in full. John admitted that after leaving the jail meeting, before he ever contacted the FBI, he had driven to that church himself, just to see whether any part of his brother's account checked out. And he told investigators that if he had found Carlie alive in that field, his plan had been to free her, give her some money, take a photograph of her, sell that photograph to the media, and use the proceeds to hire his brother a better lawyer. Let that fully land. His plan was to locate an 11-year-old child who had been abducted and assaulted, photograph her in that state for profit, sell the image to the highest bidder, and funnel the money toward protecting the man who had taken her. That is the world Carlie Brucia was caught in the middle of. This case took over 2 weeks of research. Court documents, archived news reports, FBI records, press conference transcripts. We went through all of it because this story deserves to be told correctly. Not clickbait, not speculation. The truth. If that matters to you, if you believe cases like this one deserve real attention, hit the like button right now. It helps more than you think. Subscribe if you have not already. And drop a comment telling us which part of this case has hit you the hardest so far. We read every single one. Your support is what keeps Criminal Static running. Now let us get back to the case. The trial opened on the 7th of November, 2005, in Sarasota. Nearly 2 years after Carlie had disappeared, the courtroom was filled to capacity. When the surveillance footage played on the screen for the jury, some jurors sat forward on the edges of their seats. Others pressed their fingers to their lips and held them there. The same 19 seconds the entire country had already seen. But in that courtroom, with her family sitting just rows away, it did not land the same way it had on television sets across America. It never does. Prosecutor Deborah Riva did not need theatrics. She had an avalanche, and she built it methodically, piece by piece. She told the jury plainly. The defendant used power and control to abduct, sexually batter, and kill 11-year-old Carlie. Then she laid out what the evidence would show. Forensic analysts had found semen on Carlie's shirt. An FBI supervisor testified that the sample matched Joseph Smith's DNA profile at all 13 relevant locations on the genetic strand. The statistical probability of that sample belonging to any randomly selected Caucasian male was 1 in 32 quintillion. Sit with that number for a moment. There are roughly 8 billion people on this planet. 1 in 32 quintillion is not a probability in any practical sense. It is a scientific certainty dressed in the only language a courtroom has available to it. That evidence left no space for reasonable doubt of any kind. But the DNA was not where it ended. Inside Jeffrey Pincus's pale yellow Buick, the car Smith had borrowed and returned looking like he had, in Jeff's own words, had a wonderful night. Investigators found 2 of Carlie's head hairs. They also recovered 7 individual fibers from the car's interior that matched the fabric of her red t-shirt exactly. The car had been scrubbed clean. Everything else was gone. But not those hairs. Not those 7 fibers. The medical examiner testified that the cause of death was ligature strangulation. The marks on her neck were consistent with a cord or lace pulled from behind. The marks on her wrists confirmed she had been bound before she died. She never had a chance to run. And then came the letter. The prosecution called a cryptanalyst to the stand. Because while Joseph Smith sat in custody awaiting his murder trial, he had written to his brother John from his jail cell in a coded message. He was confident that no one outside the 2 of them could read it. He was wrong. The FBI cracked the code completely. And when the decoded text was read aloud in that Sarasota courtroom, every person in the room went quiet. The backpack and clothes went in 4 different dumpsters. I left it out in the open. I dragged the body to where it was found. Destroy this after deciphering it, and shut up. He wrote that from inside a jail cell, while his trial was being assembled around him using the very evidence he was trying to manage. Still directing his brother. Still attempting to bury what remained. The letter was never destroyed. It sat in an evidence file waiting patiently to be read aloud to 12 people whose job it was to decide whether Joseph Peter Smith would live or die. Then the prosecution played the recorded jailhouse phone call between Smith and his mother. The courtroom went quiet in the particular way it only does when something genuinely heavy moves through it. Hi, Joe. The best thing that you could do is just try and explain it was an accident. And it was not an accident, Mom. I know that, Joe. The jury heard every single word. John Smith then took the stand, and became a problem almost immediately. He was declared a hostile witness. He was personally facing his own pending drug and robbery charges at the time. It was later reported that he was under the influence of crack cocaine during his testimony. The defense attacked his credibility with everything available to them. It did not matter. The DNA was already entered into evidence. The coded letter was already entered into evidence. The jailhouse call was already entered into evidence. 2 hairs and 7 fibers from a car that had been deliberately scrubbed were already entered into evidence. The prosecution did not rest on the reliability of a man with his own charges pending. It rested on a mountain of physical and recorded proof that existed completely independently of anything John Smith said or failed to say on that stand. On the 17th of November, 2005, the jury returned. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the charges. The defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged. Carlie's mother broke down and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus." Carlie's father nodded once. Joseph Smith sat there, guilty on all 3 counts, and showed no emotion. A slight nod. Nothing more. The same face he had worn throughout every single day of proceedings. Outside the courthouse afterward, Susan said, "I lost one of the most precious things to me in my life because of an animal, a disgusting, perverted animal. The fact that I can never hold her again, never see her again. I am broken." On the 1st of December, that same jury voted 10-2 in favor of the death penalty. On the 15th of March, 2006, Judge Andrew Owens delivered the formal sentence. Before announcing it, he spoke directly and at length about what had been done and who it had been done to. Carlie endured unspeakable trauma, which began at the time of her kidnapping. The image of the defendant taking her arm and leading her away no doubt will forever be etched in our minds. At 11 years of age, there is no doubt she was aware of her dire predicament and that she had little or no hope of survival. Her death was conscienceless and pitiless, calculated and premeditated. Then he looked directly at Joseph Smith. "Through your actions, you have forfeited the right to live freely among us. May God have mercy on your soul." Smith showed no emotion. The same blank face. All the way to the end. Death by lethal injection for the murder. 2 life terms for kidnapping and capital sexual battery. Carlie's stepfather Stephen buried his face in his hands as the sentence was read aloud. Afterward, he said what many of the people who had loved her were also quietly carrying inside themselves. "I thought I would feel a lot different. But it still hurts. It does not change anything. I just feel that Carlie has been heard. The system had other plans." After the 2006 death sentence, the legal machinery engaged the way it always does in capital cases. For years the conviction held and the sentence held, and it appeared that the process was moving, however slowly and however painfully, toward the ending everyone expected. Then in 2016, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Hurst v. Florida that the state's death penalty framework was unconstitutional. It had been allowing death sentences from juries that were not unanimous in their recommendation. Smith's jury had voted 10-2. In 2018, his death sentence was overturned. In 2020, it was reinstated. Months after that, it was called into question again. A new sentencing hearing was ordered, then rescheduled, then delayed without a new date set. 17 years of motions, rulings, counter-rulings, and postponements stretching from 2006 all the way to 2021. For a family that had already had every conceivable thing taken from them. Every new court date was another wound reopened in the exact same place. Carlie's father Joe never softened his words about any of it. "I feel so let down by the system." Joseph Smith was on parole before he got to my daughter. He was supposed to go back to jail for 5 years if he violated. He did violate. He was passed out with a bag of cocaine in a parking lot. Instead of giving him the consequence they promised, they gave him drug offender probation, which is just semantics. And that is why my daughter is not here today. That is not grief talking. That is a father who followed the chain of cause and effect back to its starting point and stated exactly what he found there. The math is not complicated. It is just brutal. In the wake of Carlie's death, Representative Katherine Harris introduced federal legislation called Carlie's Law. The bill would have required repeat offenders who commit violent or sexual crimes against children to be automatically returned to custody, removing the kind of judicial discretion that had allowed Smith to remain free in the first place. It had bipartisan co-sponsors. It had public support. It carried behind it the full moral weight of what had happened to a 6th grader in Sarasota, because a judge looked at a written agreement and chose not to enforce it. Then the state's top prison official testified that enforcement of the bill would cost close to $1 billion. The bill died. It was never reintroduced. Joe Brucia's response was 9 words. "No one has the right to put a price on my daughter's life." He was right. And the bill still died. Here is what is not get discussed enough. The damage did not stop with Carlie. It moved outward like a wave and kept moving for years, reaching things that never appeared in court records or legislative filings or news coverage, quietly destroying them one by one. Carlie's paternal grandmother, Andrea Brucia, had a statement read on her behalf during the penalty phase of the trial. "We will never know her as a teenager. Our family is forever broken. Our hearts will never heal." She died shortly before the 2005 trial concluded. The family says she died of a broken heart. Carlie's grandfather was so overtaken by grief that he could not remain in the country where it had happened. He moved to Europe. He died there. Her uncle drove his truck into a tree and died from the injuries he sustained. People close to the family believe it was not an accident. And then there is Carlie's mother, Susan, the woman who had sat in a Sarasota courtroom with her head bowed and tears on her face, whispering, "Thank you, Jesus," when the guilty verdict was announced. Susan Shorpen spent the years that followed in a battle she was not equipped to win, against a grief that had no floor, no point where it leveled and became something survivable. She wrote about it herself in a letter read at Smith's sentencing. "My heart, my mind, and my body ache all the time. I will never have closure. It does not exist." She committed herself to institutions 3 times trying to find a way through it. She was trying to survive a pain that had no bottom and no end and no exit. In July of 2005, she lost custody of Carlie's younger brother Leif. On the 10th of April, 2017, Susan Shorpen died of a heroin overdose. She was 47 years old. A close friend said afterward, "Carlie's death was something impossible for Susan to recover from." Susan never got to see the day Joseph Smith stopped breathing. On the 26th of July, 2021, Joseph Peter Smith died at Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. He was 55 years old, still on death row, still technically awaiting resentencing, never executed by the state that had sentenced him to die 15 years earlier. His cause of death was not publicly released. The state attorney's office issued a statement and used the word closure. John Smith, the man who had led investigators through the dark to a field behind a church, who had stood in a packed courtroom and testified against his own brother, who had carried the specific and particular weight of that jail room conversation for 17 years, had the last word on all of it. He said that Joseph had never truly confessed, never meaningfully taken responsibility, never said the words that needed to be said to the people who needed to hear them. Then John said, "He died a coward. That is all." Before Smith died, investigators had been examining him in connection with a separate unsolved case. In the year 2000, a 25-year-old woman named Tara Riley was found dead. Her body was recovered from a retention pond behind a Walmart on Cortez Road in Bradenton, Florida. She had been found naked. No one was ever charged. The case was never solved. John Smith had worked alongside Tara Riley and knew her personally. He told investigators he would bet his life his brother was responsible for her death. He said Tara had rejected Joseph. He said that rejection and the humiliation Joseph felt because of it had become the motive. Joseph Smith was never charged in connection with Tara Riley. Her case remains open and unsolved to this day. Whatever he knew about what happened to her in Bradenton in 2000, he took it with him when he died. And Tara Riley's family is still waiting for an answer that may now never come. At McIntosh Middle School in Sarasota, Florida, there is a butterfly garden. Students from Suncoast Technical College spent months in 2022 restoring it completely. They repiped the irrigation. They replanted everything. They rebuilt it from the ground up. When the garden was rededicated, Joe Brucia stood there and said, "It is part of my daughter's legacy. I had to continue to help other children, to bring awareness and education for child safety. All of our classmates are young women and men now." Behind the Central Church of Christ on Proctor Road, the same church, the same field, the same stretch of dark Florida brush where investigators found her at 1 in the morning on the 6th of February, 2004, a granite memorial stone still marks the exact spot where she was found. People still come there. They still lay flowers. Joe Brucia has kept her photographs on the walls of his home for over 20 years. He still talks about her. He still fights. He still says her name out loud, in interviews, at dedications, in statements to courts that kept scheduling and rescheduling his daughter's killer's sentencing for 17 years. Because saying her name is the only honest answer to any of this. Carlie Brucia was 11 years old. She sang in the school chorus. She was obsessed with Jennifer Lopez and she adored her cat, and she gave everyone she met a hug like she genuinely, completely meant it. She was less than a mile from home on a Sunday evening in February 2004. And she deserved every single year she never got to live. If you are still watching this, thank you. This case deserves every second of attention it gets. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is over there right now. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. And subscribe to Criminal Static with the notification bell turned all the way on. We are not done, and neither is this case.